Sweet. I didn't have a fun fact until now. And the fun fact about me is that my Twitter handle is Taquitos, but that's also all of my email addresses, even at Google, Gmail, Facebook, like all the things. It's just Taquitos. No real reason, I don't know, I like that. So thanks so much for having me out here. I'm Josh, and like I said, you can find me at Taquitos on Twitter and GitHub. I'm an engineer at Google, and I'm working on an open source tool called Fastlane, which many of you have heard about. So I used to work at Twitter, where I got to help build the Fabric iOS app. And before that, I worked on some safety features in the Twitter app. So before that, I was actually at Apple, where I was the iOS tech lead for iTunes University, which I also think is still the absolute best way that you can learn anything right now, as long as you have an iDevice, which can be a little expensive. All right, so why am I here? I love emojis. My talk is about saving a lot of time, automating tasks so that you can spend all of your time doing the things that you actually want to be doing. So I'm going to talk about 3 key issues that we face as iOS developers and how we can overcome those using Fastlane. I want the talk to be very practice-oriented so that everybody in the room learns something and you can start using it today. So we have this amazing slide right here. Raising your hands, how many of you have seen this dialogue? Okay, yeah, it's like almost everybody. Yeah, so I don't know if you remember this, but like you could accidentally click on fix issue and it would just like break all the things for all of your teammates. And then one of your teammates might click it and it would like break all the things again, and it would just like keep on going through to get an email with like reply alls, and it's just so yeah, this isn't actually supposed to be an issue anymore in Xcode. Furthermore, Xcode is actually supposed to be incrementally better at managing signing certs. But when it comes to making sure that everybody on your team has the right certs and can build and actually sign things, I'm not sure about you, but I'm always like crossing my fingers that it actually is going to work. So, as an iOS developer, I'd be willing to bet that you've heard some of these quotes before. Felix is the only person who knows how to do a release, and he's on vacation, so we can't do a release. We're missing devices from the provisioning profile. Like, can we please get those added? And we got to regenerate the profiles, resign, or the build is just broken. I don't know. Then we have, the marketing team really, really wants the latest screenshots for the features that you guys have been building. And so you're going to have to spend some time doing that. And then I think the best is, let's not go through this really tedious release process just for this one really tiny bug. We might as well just wait for the next release. So this is where Fastlane comes into play. So as we know, release day, super exciting day. All of your hard work is paid off. We're ready to get our features and apps into our customers' hands. But there are so many steps involved. First you're testing. And you're like, okay, this works, this is great. Then you're like, okay, I got to take some screenshots, so it's take a little bit of time. Then you build it. And then you're like, I didn't build because my signing certs are all screwed up, so you spend some time working on that. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's right, our push cert needs to be updated, and so I got to push that up. Then you upload the actual build to iTunes Connect, and then you have to wait for it to process. And then you can finally submit it. So that's where Fastlane comes into play. So Fastlane is a tool that helps you automate all the tedious tasks like testing, building, signing, and deploying your app. It consists of a number of tools that each solve a really specific problem, and this list has been growing just quite a bit. So it lets you do things like maintaining your provisioning profiles, building stuff, and deploying your application. And Fastlane is actually at the top there strategically because it's a tool that connects all of these tools as well as third-party tools into one entire workflow, so you can easily automate all of your processes. The tools are open source. They're all command line, and they're available on GitHub. Okay, so when we're talking about continuous delivery with iOS, what do we mean by that? What are the goals there? So first off, we think everything should be automatic. You should be able to push a button and everything should be done for you. Secondly, we want to store as much information as possible in version control. I can't stress this enough. All of your configurations, all your build scripts, all your build info, everything should just be in version control. This way you have a proper history, and also means that you can just check out your repository and get building right away. The other thing is that when Felix is on vacation, we still want to be able to deploy. So everybody, even new employees on the first day of the job, should be able to check out your repository and be able to build your app without any issue. Like, what we really don't want to have is the internal wiki that has links to how to add profiles or generate certs or any of that stuff. We're developers. Like, it would be great if all that stuff was just in a repo and we could handle it automatically. So we don't have time to cover all of the tools, obviously. So let's just focus on the 3 common problems you probably experience and how we can solve them using Fastlane. So first off, we've got creating screenshots. It's a major, major pain point. Then it comes our favorite topic, which is code signing and provisioning profiles, actually. And then last, it's automation of your deployment process. So screenshots. You know, every time you publish a new app, you need to generate some new screenshots, especially if you have updated your, any of your features or you want to highlight some features. And then you have to upload those to iTunes Connect. And over time, you can have these huge design changes, or it doesn't even have to be huge, it can be small, but the marketing people are like, please update it. New devices come on the market, so you want to update it for that as well. And it's really surprisingly difficult to do that correctly. So just to give you an idea, in iOS, if you have 5 screenshots and 6 device types and 10 different languages, you're going to end up with 300 screenshots that you need to take. And you have to generate those locally, and the pain doesn't necessarily stop there because you still have to collect them all, upload them into iTunes Connect, and like put them in the correct places. Super painful. So we have this one tool called Snapshot. We built it to automate that entire process for you, and it uses UI testing frameworks, which were recently added to Xcode, I think just a couple of WWDCs ago. So it's a really cool technology, and it enables you to interact with your app in a really natural way. You basically just tell Snapshot to go to a certain view, navigate around, tap on things, and take screenshots. Snapshot will iterate through all of your languages, and it'll do the exact same thing. It'll generate those screenshots, and it'll collect them for you in a folder so that you can upload them to iTunes Connect using another tool called Deliver. So probably not an Android developer, but we do have a tool that will do the exact same thing for Android, and it's called Screengrab. So that's cool, but how does it actually look in action? Well, if you already have Snapshot set up, all you have to do is enter Fastlane Snapshot in the command line. Snapshot will automatically detect your project settings, and then it'll start running these UI tests. You can see the simulator just like jumping up over here. What's really great though is that this all runs in the background, and so you can interact with your computer however you want to, and it's not going to interrupt things. So it'll collect all these screenshots into a folder, and then it'll give you a nice HTML report where you can see all the screenshots in all the various different languages. So actually a lot of companies like to use this HTML report to kind of get a sense of, does this look okay? In particular, people who support the German language, because you can really quickly see if your localization is not working out for you. All right, so on to provisioning profiles. It's our favorite, code signing provisioning profiles. So back to our favorite dialog. So while clicking fix issue does sometimes actually fix your issue, it can be incredibly dangerous, and so we don't want people to do that, and luckily I don't think we can do that anymore anyway. But I want to talk to you about how code signing actually works and how to do it right, because I think that a lot of people don't totally understand code signing, and I'm not going to lie, I didn't understand it until like, I don't know, just maybe a few months ago, and I worked at Apple, so I'm just going to give a really basic overview. So first off, you need a code signing identity. And the code signing identity is just, it's basically like a public certificate and a private key pair. And you can use a tool called cert to generate that. The private key that's generated is stored locally on your machine. It's not in the Apple Developer Portal, so you can't just like go and re-download that if you accidentally delete it. That's the reason why you have to manually transfer it if you ever change between Macs. So then, next up, we have to deal with our provisioning profiles. So provisioning profiles, that's the connection between your code signing identity and your app identifier. Provisioning profiles are stored on the Apple Developer Portal, so that's cool. You can re-download them. You can always be accessed. But remember that the only thing that's not on the portal is that private key. I can't stress that enough. So now we go ahead and we build and sign your app. We have Jim, which will do that for you as well. And if you look at this graphic, I just want to point out that it's really important that like the provisioning profile, signing cert, and the app IDs all are aligned with each other, or else you're going to get some really random build errors that I'm sure you've seen, probably even like error 65. So if everything works correctly, you're going to end up with a signed IPA, and you can use that signed IPA to send it up to iTunes Connect or to a beta testing service like Fabric, Beta, or Hockey App. All right, so what does this actually look like when you're using Fastlane? It's just cert, sci, Jim. So yeah, there's definitely like a bunch of options that you can pass into it, but the defaults are generally like, they're awesome. That being said, it's like, oh, we've got 3 commands now, like, why 3 commands? It's still a lot of work. So let's see how we can even automate this. But before we do that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about code signing because it's like such a fun topic. So Apple, they recommend that you do code signing in a really interesting way. I don't know, I don't think it's like the worst way, but it's interesting. So each developer in a team, you have to have your own code signing identity. And that means that you have to have one app ID for every app that you have. You have to have one code signing identity for every engineer that's on your team. And then you have one provisioning profile for each app ID and for each developer. And additionally, you need to do this for each environment, so like ad hoc and developer and app store. And so that means that after you get just a few developers and a few apps, you're going to end up with like hundreds of provisioning profiles in your developer portal. And it looks something kind of like that, where you get this like mixture of certs and most of them are expired or whatever. So it's kind of a big mess. And then after you do that, you have to kind of think about these things where it's like, all right, so how do we keep these profiles and certificates actually in sync? Like if you want to add a new device, how do you update this? How do you make sure everybody has access to it? How does onboarding a new developer look like? And what does her first day of work consist of? So this isn't really the ideal setup because you end up spending like an entire day just setting up your laptop. So that's why we have a different approach in Fastlane. So what if, instead of having hundreds of profiles and certificates for each developer, we just share a code signing identity across the entire team? We can use that one identity to deploy the app to the App Store, and you can store that identity and its private key in a Git repository. So you already use Git probably to sync your code. What you can do is you can have a separate Git repository with just the code signing identity inside of it, and you can encrypt it, or you can just keep it a little bit secure with access control. You can set who has read-write access to it. So with this, that means that you can really easily onboard a new developer. So I bet you're really surprised. We have a tool that implements this flow, and it's called Match. And so here's what that looks like. First thing, you just run Match in it. It's going to ask you for a URL for your Git repository. And what's really great about Git repos is that you already have the access control. And then you can decide which users have read-write access. Okay, next, the first time you run Match, it'll generate a new App Store provisioning profile and certificate, and that was it. That's it. That's the whole entire thing. You just run this on every machine that you want to be able to code sign your application with. And what's really great about this is that you can grant access. Well, you don't have to grant access to your developer portal to any of your developers, because the iTunes, the developer portal and iTunes Connect and all those things are they're not actually connected. You have to create separate accounts for them. Yeah, so you just have to grant access to the Git repository, and that's it. So it simplifies things. Okay, so I know you'll have like very unique code signing setups, multiple app IDs, many different workstations, targets, etc. But you can actually still use Match. In most cases, actually, the stuff will just work like right out of the box, as long as you've disabled Xcode's automatic code signing. That's the key. When it comes to building and signing, though, if you don't use Match, I mean, you should. Crazy if you don't. You'll need to specify a mapping of app targets to provisioning profiles. And that's because Fastlane tries to be really smart, and it tries to figure out everything that it absolutely needs, but your profiles tend to get updated behind the scenes, or other people update them. And so Fastlane doesn't do a really great job of knowing when that happens and which profiles to use. So without Fastlane, I usually just like click around in here for like, I don't know, 10 minutes until finally whatever I'm trying to do works. I'm probably not the only person, but yeah, it feels pretty silly. So seriously, check this out. Match is on our code signing guide, and it's codesigning.guide. It provides tons of examples and use cases for how to do this, ranging from Xcode 7 up to 8 and 9, because it requires a slightly different configuration, but we've got it all covered. Okay, so we've covered snapshots and code signing. Let's talk about why you'd even want to automate deployment. So think about this scenario. You've got a boss or a project manager who's like, hey, can you get a new build out to our customers, or like maybe want to send it out to your designers? You're like, yeah, sure, I can do that. All right, cool. So I'm just gonna go ahead and like version bump, and then I'm gonna commit that version bump and push it to our repository. And then I'm gonna make sure that all the devices are in our provisioning profile. I'm gonna build and sign the app, and I'm gonna export it. I'm gonna upload it to our beta service, or iTunes Connect. I'm gonna add some release notes, and then I'm finally gonna go ahead and distribute that. And like that's a ton of work. That probably takes you a good long while, unless you're like used to doing this all the time. It usually takes me at least half a day to like remember all the steps. So we can actually reduce this all down to a single push of the button. First off, Fastlane uses a so-called fast file, and that's basically a configuration file that contains all of the information that's needed to deploy your app. You basically just define what steps that you want to run, in what order, and then Fastlane will make sure to execute it. And this group of steps here, that's called a lane. So if one of these steps fails, it'll fail for the entire lane. Like it's not going to continue to try to move forward with it. So what does a configuration look like for the example that we were just talking about? Here's my beta lane. So in this case, we increment the version number. We then commit the version bump back, and then we push it to the Git repository. After that, we're going to use those three tools that we talked about, which is cert, sci, and gym. So handles all the certs and it builds. You could actually just use match at this point instead of cert and sci together. But, and then finally, we upload our IPA to Crashlytics or hockey app. And after that, we can post a message to Slack that, hey, guess what? Our build is ready. You can go ahead and download it. And speaking of Slack, we actually have over 170 different integrations, and I think that's what's really cool about Fastlane is that we work with so many different tools. And these are things like HipChat, Crashlytics, Hockey, email actions, various different Git actions, and so on. And if something isn't available but you want to use it, you can easily extend Fastlane with your own existing shell scripts, existing Ruby scripts, or you can even build your own actions. And actually, we've got this kind of new plugin system working where you can build out a bunch of functionality and then have an official plugin. And we even like rank plugins, kind of CocoaPods inspired. So it's really neat. There's like many options here. All right, so looking at this whole file again, you're probably thinking like, how does Crashlytics know where it can find the IPA file, or like how does Jim know what provisioning profile to use? And these are all things that Fastlane will take care of for you. You don't have to actively think about it. Fastlane will just pass this information from one step to the next. You can also provide some extra arguments via environment variables if you want to, or you can really configure each one of these very specifically. But the defaults, again, those are like usually pretty good. So now I've just finished writing this fast file. How do you go ahead and run that? Well, that's easy enough. It's just Fastlane beta. So I'm just going to run the beta lane. How does that look like in action? So here we're going to build a new release, and we're going to send it to the App Store. So we're running Fastlane iOS release. And this will first build and sign the application using Gym. As you see, the tools are printed out, or the command line, the commands are printed out for every tool that runs. That way we can be fully transparent about what's going on here. Once the build is done, it's going to use a tool called Pilot to upload the new build to iTunes Connect. And for uploading the binary, Fastlane uses iTunes Transporter, which is a tool that's already bundled into Xcode. And it's already done before I finished talking about this slide. So kind of cool. Of course, it's like, time lapse, but I like to pretend it's that fast. So looking at this output, you can see that we get this nice little summary table, and includes all the parameters that were used up to this point. It's really, really useful because you can go back into your CI system and see like what were we doing in our CI system, a month ago? How did we build this a month ago? Why does it not work? And then you can kind of compare the changes. So it really helps you debug. And it also really helps that all those commands up there are printed out, so you can see what was happening, and if something failed, you can go ahead and debug that as well. So that was just a small example of a really, really useful workflow with a few tools. But Fastlane can do so much more. So I'm going to tell you really quickly about each one of these tools. I promise it won't be too tedious. So Deliver enables you to upload app metadata and send builds to iTunes Connect. Snapshot, you saw, generates screenshots. Frame It will generate a nice marketing style frame around those screenshots, so it looks really pretty. And then we have PEM, which manages your push certificates. Sci generates your provision profile. Cert manages your code signing identity. Produce helps automate app creation. So if you're into white label apps, it's a really great tool because you can just have one build step to create a new app for a new company. Gym builds and signs your app. Scan makes running your tests super easy. And then we have Precheck, which is my favorite tool because I wrote it. It inspects your app's metadata to ensure that you have the highest chance of passing app review. And Pilot helps you manage your testers and test flight. And then Match, it syncs your certificates and profiles across your team using Git. There is one thing that I didn't mention, and that's Spaceship. So many of the tools that we use, they talk with Apple in some way. So how does that work? Like, there's no official Apple API. So we have this tool called Spaceship, and it's part of Fastlane. And what it does is it takes care of communicating between the 3 different Apple backends. So we've got iTunes Connect, we've got the Apple Developer Portal, and we also have the API that Xcode uses. So Spaceship provides a unified API for these 3 different backends, and it's a Ruby library. So what does this look like, and how would you even use that? Well, you call spaceship.login and you provide an Apple ID. If this was your first time, it's going to ask you for a password. And then from there, you can just read the metadata that's associated with your account. You can modify these changes and you can push them right back up to the backend. The way that you interact with it is actually quite similar to how you would do core data or active record, if you're familiar with Rails. But you're actually modifying developer resources. So that's really pretty cool. But like, why would you care about this? Like, we use it in Fastlane, but why am I telling you about this? That's because we can actually, we can build our own tools using this. And you don't have to do any of the work to figure out how to talk to Apple. So if you want to play around with it, we made it super easy to do. We've got Spaceship Playgrounds. So after installing Fastlane, you just run Fastlane Spaceship, and it'll pull up this information sheet. And from there, you can just start experimenting. It tells you, some pretty basic instructions. But you can see we're doing like, application.all, we're assigning to all apps, and then it prints out all the metadata associated with those apps. So I totally recommend using Spaceship to build your own tools if you feel like it. So Spaceship, what's really neat about it is that it uses plain HTTP to talk to Apple. So that means we're not going in there and like clicking buttons. We're not parsing HTML. It's just plain HTTPS requests, and that means it's really, really fast. It's actually usually a lot faster than using Apple's API. And because it's just plain HTTP, it means that it can run on Linux as well. And so that means we can run it on a server. But like, why would you want to do that? I'll tell you. Yes. So we've got this really, really cool project called Boarding. when I think it was Felix and Stefan, they built Spaceship together, and they spent a weekend just doing sort of a proof of concept app that you could get up and running with the framework. And so this is an open source project, and it's on GitHub, on the Fastlane organization. But what it is that it's a Ruby on Rails project that gives you a really beautiful landing page for users that want to beta test your app. And what's really cool about it is that you no longer have to manually go to iTunes Connect and add testers in and like save it and update it. This is actually like so simple. On the website, you have like the Heroku one-button deploy. So you can use that. So you know it's like really, really easy. And boarding was just a project to demonstrate what you could do with Spaceship, like I said. And it only took a weekend, which I think is pretty cool. And now lots of people use it. It's really, really supported, and it's totally maintained by the community, really, really active. So feel free to use it in your own apps. All right, so I'm going to jump back into Fastlane and emojis, because I got to put emojis in here. So some of you who use third-party crash reporters, like Crashlytics, probably have run into this problem, especially if you use Bitcode. You build your app, and then you upload it to iTunes Connect. It gets approved, and it gets released. And then at some point, your app crashes, and so you go to your crash reporter's dashboard, and you look it up, and you're like, there's nothing here. Or there's something there, but like it just looks crazy, you're not getting any information about it. Or you don't see a stack trace. That's right, Apple recompiled my app, and the crash reporting tool doesn't have those new DSIMs. And so I've got to go log into iTunes Connect, find the build, download the DSIMs, and then log into the crash reporter, figure out where I actually can upload those DSIMs, because sometimes it's kind of hidden, and then upload them. It's just it's a huge pain in the butt. Well, Fastlane has got your back, so you can just do this. Here, Fastlane will download your DSIMs from Apple. It will upload your symbols to Crashlytics. There's also an upload symbols for hockey, I believe. It'll then clean itself up, and like that's it. That's all the code that you need to run. So if you wanted to, you could even like do a cron job or something and just like do this after you do your release. You can find more information about this at docs.fastlane.tools. Okay, so I mentioned this is a Ruby on Rails, sorry, not Ruby on Rails. This is all Ruby tooling. And why? Well, Ruby is very flexible. It's a powerful language. It allows us to move really, really fast. And I think the syntax is really easy to pick up. And it feels more natural to me than many of the C-style languages that I've used in the past. And the Ruby frameworks, also called gems, are really highly available, super easy to extend, and it's just easy to use. But if you're if you're convinced that Fastlane is awesome, but you're like me a couple of years ago before I started working in Fastlane. By that, I mean I wanted to work in Xcode. I really wanted syntax highlighting, not just a plain text editor like you generally do with Ruby. I wanted auto-completion. I also wanted compile time errors instead of having to run Ruby and just waiting for those runtime errors to show up. And more recently, I've wanted to use the same language I've been using, which is Swift, because I love Objective-C. I really do. But Swift is the future. So these things prevented me from adopting Fastlane until I actually joined Fabric. And I've heard from others that Ruby is a barrier to entry as well. So for today, for the first time ever, I'm publicly announcing Fastlane.Swift. Yeah. Thank you. Beta. Yeah. Still awesome. So let's take a look at the screen again. This is the Ruby version of the file. Remember that we can increment the version number, commit the version bump, push to Git, build and sign, and then finally distribute and notify the team. So what does that look like in Swift? Yeah, animation. It's just about the same. There are some small differences here, like how we're explicitly passing a few variables that we didn't see before. For example, if you take a look at the call to SCI, we're passing in an app identifier. We're also passing in the Apple ID. I did say it was beta. I'm working on fixing it so that it's even more concise. That being said, I am committed to not breaking this API. I know you're all used to that, but I don't want that. So you can build with confidence, knowing that as this approaches more of an official release, your code will just continue to work. So some of this work being done during the beta period will be to fix things like what I mentioned, passing in those variables. So this is cool. You can use Sci, but something I'm or Swift, but what I'm really excited about is how this interacts with Xcode now. So when you work on your fast file, you actually get to work within an Xcode project. So that means you can build and even test your fast file like right there. You get the error checking, the syntax highlighting, and auto completion. Like if you look at all the actions that are available to you, you can just explore the API and see all the great things you do. You can see I just started typing my favorite action, pre-check. All right, so now that you can use Swift as a language to configure Fastlane, why do you still care about Ruby? Well, as you can imagine, our code base handles tons of corner cases, and it's been kept up to date with Apple for years. It's been battle hardened. There's no way we're going to throw that away or even replace it. We don't want to maintain 2 projects. So how is that going to work? Fastlane.swift is just a Swift project that includes an auto-generated Fastlane API. Sounds kind of crazy. So it means that any changes that we do to Ruby Fastlane API will actually ripple down into Fastlane.swift API and be regenerated when we do any releases. It's 0 work for us. So high level, how does this actually work? Well, first we need to inspect our Fastlane code and generate our Swift API from it. The Ruby runtime provides really great reflection tooling, so that works well. But you might be wondering, like, what about the actual logic that gets run in the Swift code? Like, how's that going to work? Yes. Well, we end up needing to call Ruby code. So when Fastlane detects that you're using Fastlane.swift, it'll start a socket server that only accepts connections from your own computer. At the same time, it takes your Swift fast file, packages it up with a Swift socket client that we built, compiles it, and then executes it. And this new executable then connects to the Fastlane socket server and sends fast file commands over. It has like a 2-way communication. And when it's finished, the Swift socket client exits, the socket server quits, and you're done. So that's the 30,000-foot view. Luckily, if you want to dig into how this works, I know it sounds a little nutty. It's still 100% open source. And if you want to get started on it, you just go and you clone the branch that it's currently on, Fastlane Swift branch, of course. You create a gem file in your project directory, and you reference that Fastlane branch. You do bundle update, so you're pointing to your local version, and then you do bundle exec Fastlane init Swift, and that's it. At the end of the process, you're going to get this nice Xcode project. It's going to tell you, hey, if you want to edit your fast file, open up this Xcode project, just copy and paste it. And when you do that, you see all the files that you care about. During that initialization step, we actually created an app file .swift and a fast file.swift for you, and then we injected that into this project, so we can check that out. So we've got a test lane, we've got a beta lane, and these things are actually automatically created for you based off of the initialization step. And we're in Swift Town, so that's awesome. We've got a test lane, beta lane, and we're going to run the test lane. Bundle exec, fast lane test, same thing, nothing different, nothing's changed. Bundle exec is important, again, because we're pointing to a local branch. So that's it. Fastlane automatically detects it, builds it, and then if you've made changes to your configuration, it'll rebuild it and launches a socket server along with your Fastlane executable. Super, super fast. So wrapping up, I know that this is in beta, and that's kind of scary with history of Swift, and it might sounds like it's painful. It's not going to be, but I promise we're really happy with the API, and so there's very little chance we're going to break it in the future without some sort of backwards compatibility. So if you're up for it, we'd love to have you involved. So this was a short introduction on what you can do with Fastlane and how it helps you save a lot of time during development and deployment. We support all sorts of setups, no matter what tools you're already using and how complex your application is. It's free, again, it's open source and community supported with over 700 contributors. You all could be contributors as well. We'd love it. So thanks for the reminder, Tom. If you want to contribute, we have a bunch of GitHub issues. We have a bunch of GitHub issues that are marked needs help, or you can do this. And honestly, the Fastlane community is like really, really kind. They mean really well. They're super helpful, and I've never worked with nicer people. So you can find more information on how to get started with it at Fastlane.tools. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh, for sharing with all the new features in Fastlane. My team uses it like a lot. And we're really excited to use Fastlane in Swift.
Woo.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Okay, so we have time for one question. So does anybody have questions for Josh?
I have an answer to a question if we don't have a question. Okay.
Just have a quick question. For snapshot uploading, do you guys run any bot or runner on the website that'll run some JS to execute some stuff, or do you guys use some API? Because I know some previous versions used to use some runner which would break whenever iTunes Connect would update their website. That's one of the reasons we didn't use it then. So I'm just curious if what it's using now.
Yeah, so we actually we just use HTTPS now. We don't have a different runner. We just upload directly to their API. Yeah, so we also have retries in there. We've added retries more recently because that service oftentimes will 500 on you randomly. So we'll just go ahead and like capture that and try again. Yeah. Yeah, I want to make one quick comment about the Git repository with Match. A lot of people are like, what are the security implications of storing your private key and having other people have access to it? And I wanted to mention that like, if somebody gets your app private key and they can sign using your bundle identifier, they still have to go through the App Store review process, and they still have to get access to your developer account on iTunes Connect. And like, that's not very likely, but if they do, you're going to get an email or a notification, and you can cancel it. So it's actually not that big of a deal. Yeah.
Thank you, Josh. Let's give another round of applause.
Thank you.